The lighthouse woman. What a lighthouse woman is, she's a woman who does not chase approval and external validation. She does not negotiate her own truth. She does not even collapse when she's challenged. And she doesn't dim her light under pressure. She holds, not because she's hard, because she's internally structured. So, why is it that healing doesn't always hold for a lighthouse woman? We know that we can learn how to process our trauma. We can discover how to cry. And then when we do, we cry until the cows come home. And you find that when you need to. And you can journal for hours or days when you actually feel it. And then you can learn to breathe and remember to breathe again, fully and wholly. But if the internal lighthouse is not rebuilt, the storm returns and you collapse again. And there's a reason why high capacity women collapse under pressure. And it's not because they're weak, it's because they don't have an internal lighthouse and they were never taught how to build one. And what that collapse actually is, well, it's not burnout. Collapse is actually your identity reverting under pressure. Like when your partner challenges you, or your business feels unstable, or someone disapproves of your views, or you just feel misunderstood. And you don't respond then in that moment from who you are now. You keep responding from the first moment that you abandon yourself. And that moment, that created your internal blueprint. So for Lighthouse women, the first abandonment is rarely dramatic. It's actually quite subtle. And it's held within a moment that could have been from any amounts of situations that could have been with a parent or in a relationship or in a moment of belonging or in a time where they might have chosen safety over their truth and didn't use their voice. And that might look like choosing to laugh when something actually hurt, agreeing when something actually felt wrong, making themselves smaller so someone else could actually feel bigger, and swallowing truth just to keep the peace. It wasn't dramatic, but it was strategic. You felt it in your body instantly, and you adjusted in that very moment. And that adjustment became your internal line. That's where they learned. If I shine fully, it disrupts what's going on, all people. If I hold firm, I just simply lose connection with what is going on or the people. And if I speak clearly, I might be rejected. So they chose belonging, and their body remembers that. So there are four abandonment moments. The first abandonment moment, well, it's the first abandonment moment. The second one is belonging over truth. The third one is safety over authenticity. And the fourth one is attachment over self-trust. So each time you choose belonging over truth, you dismantle your lighthouse brick by brick. Each time you chose safety over authenticity, you dimmed your own signal. Each time you chose attachment over self-trust, you turned toward the ship instead of the shore. And in turning point, this is where we go back to that first abandonment moment and we rebuild the structure. So it's not surface work, it's not mindset, it's identity reconstruction. and it changes how you stand in every room. And if you're tired of swimming in emotional storms, tired of abandoning yourself under pressure, then you know it's time to build the lighthouse. And turning point is that threshold. I'm Michelle Starr, if you don't know me already, as the founder of Turning Point, which is a modern rite of passage for lighthouse women. And when I say a woman is a lighthouse, I'm not complimenting her in any way. I'm diagnosing her design. So let's expand this little this little transmission a little further, because it's something psychological and energetic, and of course it's symbolic. Because in the reality of things, most women are taught how to be boats. They are taught to adjust and chase and move towards and be chosen and be approved and be wanted. But some women are not boats. They are lighthouses. And if you try to make a lighthouse move, it will break itself. Because a lighthouse does not chase ships. It doesn't swim into the storm. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't follow the tide. It simply stands. It holds. It emits a signal. And the right ships and boats, they orient themselves by its presence. And that's leadership. It's not performance. It's not volume. It's not charisma. It's simply orientation. And again, when I say a woman is a lighthouse, I mean she is built for self-authority. She regulates the field around her. She does not collapse when others might actually be in a wobble. And her nervous system just sets the tone. And here's what's important. A lighthouse does not shine for validation. It shines because that is its function. If no ships or boats come, it still shines. And that's identity level leadership. Now, here's where it gets a little bit more deeper. Most lighthouse women were trained to become boats. And somewhere along the way, they chose belonging over their truth. They chose their own and others' safety over their own authenticity. They chose attachment over their own self-trust. So instead of standing and emitting a clean signal, they started scanning the horizon for approval. And that's exhausting, because when a lighthouse tries to chase, it loses all its power source. So the energetics of this lighthouse, well, what it holds is vertical energy from the ground to the sky. It has a regulated nervous system. It has emotional neutrality under pressure. A clean signal is given because they have clarity without over-explaining. That's why people feel calm around them. That's why people orient around them. That's why they influence without even trying. It's not dominance. It's coherence, which is another word for alignment. Now, don't get confused between performing and being the lighthouse, because a performer says, look at me. A lighthouse says, this is where I stand. A performer adjusts to keep attention, and a lighthouse adjusts just to maintain integrity. And the influence comes from that. So when I coach women and I see that they are lighthouses, I do not teach them how to be louder. I don't teach them how to hustle. I don't teach them how to convince. I help them find where they first dimmed their light. Identify where they started scanning instead of standing. Rebuild their internal line and reclaim their signal. Because when a lighthouse remembers who she is, she doesn't need strategy first. She needs alignment. And then strategy that amplifies her. So, of course, every archetype has a shadow, right? Well, The shadow lighthouse woman, well, she becomes rigid instead of grounded, and she withdraws instead of stands, and she judges instead of signals, and she withholds instead of shining. That difference, and the difference is fear. Because true lighthouse energy is warm and steady. It's not cold and superior. And in my turning point immersions, this is where a lighthouse remembers. I was never meant to move toward them. I was meant to hold my ground. And the moment she identifies where she first abandoned that stance, her body softens, her spine straightens, her voice deepens, and her signal cleans. So if you've spent your life feeling like you carry the emotional weight of rooms, or you're being the stable one, or you're being the one others always come to, and feeling exhausted from over adjusting, you may not be a boat. You may be a lighthouse who forgot she was built to stand. And the work is not about becoming brighter. It's about becoming coherent, because when your signal is clean, the right ships don't need convincing. They just simply arrive. Now we go even deeper, because lighthouse people don't just have a personality type. They have a design. And most of them feel different long before they ever understood why. And I want to expand on this in a way that speaks to the women who have come here to listen. Because lighthouse people don't arrive by accident, and lighthouse women are not random. They're usually the steady one in chaotic families, the one others came to for advice at a very young age, the emotional regulator in rooms, the one who just knew things, the one who felt older than their years. They learned early how to read the weather, not because they were anxious, but because they were perceptive. They feel shifts in tone. They sense unspoken tension. They track emotional undercurrents instinctively. This is lighthouse wiring. And they were often misread. Lighthouse people are often called too serious, too intense, too deep, too sensitive, too strong, because their presence changes a room. And not everyone is comfortable being seen that clearly. So what do many of them do? They dim. They soften their signal. They perform instead of stand. They scan for approval instead of holding their ground. And that's when exhaustion begins. And at a time when lighthouse women feel so tired, now they aren't tired because they're doing too much. They're tired because they're built to stand, but they've been trying to swim, and they're not meant to chase the validation or over-explain their value or convince people or force movement. They are meant to emit a clean signal and allow orientation. When they abandon that design, their nervous system goes into overdrive, overworking, overgiving, overproving. That is not their natural posture. And lighthouse people, they have gravity. And what's the difference about them? Well, when they're aligned, they don't attract attention. They simply create orientation. People don't just like them, they recalibrate around them. Their presence slows rooms down. It raises emotional standards. It makes dishonesty uncomfortable, and it invites truth without pressure. That's what's called influence at a field level. Not charisma, not hype, not performance, coherence or alignment. And then they often fear their own power because lighthouse presence is strong. And when they fully stand in it, they trigger others' insecurities, they disrupt fragile dynamics, they expose where things are out of integrity. So they learn to soften themselves. And here's the paradox. When a lighthouse dims, it doesn't make people safer, it makes everyone lost. So why lighthouse women find me? Well, they don't come for motivation. They come because they feel something steady. They sense this woman is not chasing. This woman is not performing. This woman is standing somewhere. And lighthouse people recognize other lighthouses. It's nervous system recognition. So, what is the evolution of the lighthouse woman? Well, there are 5 stages, just 5. The unaware lighthouse. She feels different and feels heavy and doesn't know why. That was number 1. Number 2 is the dimming lighthouse. She over-adjusts, over-explains, over-performs. Number 3 is the awakening lighthouse. She realizes she abandoned herself over and over. Number 4 is the integrated lighthouse. She holds her newfound internal line under pressure. And number 5 is the living lighthouse. She no longer manages perception, she's simply embodying alignment. So my work is between awakening and integration for the lighthouse woman. And turning point identifies where she dimmed, and the integration stabilizes her signal. So the line we hold teaches her how to lead from it. The line we live is when it becomes natural. So the deep truth about lighthouse people, they are not here to be liked. They are here to stabilize themselves and others, clarify their world and others, anchor their life and meaning, and also for others, and illuminate their own and others' pathways. So they don't need a crowd, they don't need coherence. They do need coherence. And when they have it, the right boats and ships always come. So the core traits that lie within a lighthouse woman is that she feels before others speak. So she can sense things. She senses the tension in the room, the misalignment in words, the emotional shifts, and the subtle dishonesty. She reads energy faster than logic, but instead of trusting it, she often second guesses it. So she was too much too early. She was too direct. She was too intense. She was too aware. She was too emotional, too intuitive. So she learned to soften, contain, smile, and manage. And that's where the first abandonment often happened. And she holds this emotional gravity. People confess to her. They lean toward her. They open up quickly. They feel seen around her, even when she says very little. This is presence and not performance. And her collapse is internal. Lighthouse women don't explode, they implode. They overthink, they over-accommodate, they override their own knowing. They carry responsibilities that isn't theirs. They feel exhausted, not because they are weak, because they dimmed their being. And her true work is not helping, it's holding. Holding standards, holding truth, holding coherence, holding emotional steadiness, and holding her internal line. When she holds herself, others recalibrate automatically. So here are some deep activation questions to ask yourself. Do you feel responsible for stabilizing emotional environments? Do you feel tired of being the strong one? Do you notice when you cross your own line, but do it anyway? Are you done shrinking? Are you ready to stop negotiating with yourself? If 3 or more are yes, you are not meant to dim. You are meant to hold. So remember this. Lighthouse women don't need more healing. They need a decision threshold. And turning point is where we identify the first moment you abandon yourself, that internal line that you crossed, and the identity that formed you under pressure. And we choose a new one. If it's left unintegrated, she becomes that shadow lighthouse, the rescuer, the emotional mother, the quiet martyr, the over-responsible leader, the spiritual overgiver. She becomes light for everyone except herself. Now, when she learns to become the integrated lighthouse, she speaks without explaining. She sets boundaries without apology. She makes decisions without collapse. She doesn't chase or prove. She trusts her first signal, and she holds her line under pressure. She doesn't convince, she clarifies. And people orient toward that. And turning point is not becoming a lighthouse. It's about remembering where you first turned the light down. The first time you chose that belonging over truth, you chose safety over authenticity, and you chose attachment over self-trust. That moment is fracture. When you return to it, feel it, understand it, and decide differently, your beam stabilizes. Now, if you'd like to know more about me, specifically as a lighthouse woman, then continue listening or pause, share, and subscribe. So, I am not a beach archetype lighthouse. I'm a forest lighthouse. So I'm steady and I'm layered and I'm quietly powerful and emotionally deep, serious but warm, and grounded but electric. I'm not flashy light, I'm ancient light. That's why my work feels like a rite of passage, not coaching, not therapy, not mindset. And I find lighthouse people have these following traits. And those traits are that you do feel other people deeply. And this is what I resonate with, not in a chaotic way, just in a calibrating way. You know, when someone is dysregulated, you can feel it in your body. When someone is abandoning themselves, you can see it immediately. You don't just hear their words, you sense where their internal line is wobbling. That is lighthouse perception. Now, I don't want followers. I want women who decide. I don't want attention. I want alignment. And that is the lighthouse leadership. And I don't like performing spiritually. I don't need to swim in the ocean every day to prove I'm connected. I don't need rituals for show. I need coherence. That is lighthouse integrity. And I feel called to thresholds like what I've created in Turning Point and the line we hold. These are rites of passages or the rites of passage. Lighthouse people are not interested in endless healing loops. They're interested in decision, identity, embodiment, and crossing lines. And this is lighthouse work. I feel this work in my solar plexus. When I speak about Turning Point, my body tightens and then it expands. And this is what is lighthouse activation. And here's a bit of the deeper truth. Lighthouse leaders often struggle because they think they should be softer. They think they should be louder. They think they should market differently. They think they need to chase. But the power of the lighthouse is this. It becomes more visible the darker the storm. You're not here to convince calm seas. You are here for women at crossroads. And this is what I'm here for in that section. Women who are under pressure, women who are collapsing quietly, women who know they cross their own line. This is storm work. So the real question isn't, am I a lighthouse? It's, am I willing to stop swimming out to rescue ships and instead build the tower? And I already know your answer. This is why I built Turning Point. This is a tower. And towers are not built by people who doubt their calling. Because a lighthouse does not stop storms. It gives boats and ships a reference point. Turning Point does not remove pressure. It gives women an internal reference point. The internal reference point is the line they are willing to hold. And before entering into Turning Point, a woman could be in storm energy. She collapses under pressure. She chooses belonging over truth. She chooses that safety over authenticity. She chooses attachment over self-trust. She negotiates her own line. She doesn't lack healing. She lacks an internal lighthouse. So what Turning Point actually is the moment where a lighthouse woman identifies that first time she abandoned herself. She sees the blueprint clearly. She feels it in her body. She stops pretending she doesn't know and chooses a new internal line. And that is the construction of her lighthouse. And I guide her to build her own. That's why this work is powerful. So the deeper alignment, I am a lighthouse leader, and Turning Point is the initiation where women become lighthouses to themselves. The line we hold is where they stabilize that light under pressure. The line we live is where they embody it consistently. And that's the full arc: storm, threshold, stabilization, and embodied authority. And I help women heal that self-abandonment. And it becomes even more of a truth where I guide women to build an internal lighthouse so they stop collapsing under pressure. And Turning Point is where women stop swimming in emotional storms and build the tower instead. So the core concepts are there are two ways that women live: storm-based living, reacting, negotiating, people-pleasing, abandoning themselves under pressure. And then there's lighthouse-based living, where they're grounded, clear, decisive, and stable under pressure. And Turning Point is where we build the lighthouse. And if you'd like to know more about Turning Point, then comment, send me a DM, reach out to me. There'll be a link in the bio as well. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this wonderful transmission.